So my name is Matthew Morris. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer from the CodeWizards Group. I've spent most of my life in the games industry, always on the commercial side, dealing with game developers, and quite often this question of whether to buy technology or whether to build it in-house has often come up. And I've been on every kind of angle of this throughout my career. I did a tour of duty at Unity, and I understood, where we were going in. We were talking to people about buying game engine technology, and this is where that constant pressure of should a game developer use this in-house or build their own engine from scratch or just buy something off the shelf really came up a lot. And it's given me a great opportunity to kind of see that from every angle, see the advantages and disadvantages of it. So when I had this opportunity to host this panel today with such a brilliant team of people, I was really excited about it because it's something I think a lot of people really struggle with in the game development space. We see, I have had everything from a client once telling me they were very proud that they owned the diesel generators in the data center that ran their game, which I thought was the most ridiculous statement anyone's ever said to me. They were very proud of this fact, all the way through to someone who has said, why the hell would I ever build something when I can buy it? I want to make a game. I don't want to do anything other than that. So I've seen that range. And so today I thought what we're going to do is get some insights from some brilliant people that really understand this space. So I'm going to let you introduce yourselves. So JP, do you want to kick us off and give us your intro?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, great. I'm Jean-Philippe. I'm the head of Xsolla Backend, formerly the co-founder and CEO of Accelerator, which is a backend technology basically that I had built as a response to the challenges that I had faced as a AAA developer, needing to have easy-to-use, turnkey backend technology.
Perfect. Alex.
Hi, I'm Alexander Bergendahl, CEO, co-founder of LootLocker. We are a game backend as a service, similar to the Xsolla backend, but much better. But similar story. In my first game studio, we wanted to build a free-to-play game. Didn't have the infrastructure to do that. This is before games or backend as a service sort of really existed. So we set out and built our own, and then eventually pivoted that into its own business.
And I'm Tim Morten, the CEO and co-founder of Frost Giant Studios. We are game development studio located in Southern California, founded by some ex-Blizzard developers. We were very used to having a whole group called the Battle.net group at Blizzard take care of backend for us. So when we started an independent studio, having a backend was a problem we had to solve.
And congratulations on your recent launch.
Thank you.
Do you want to talk about it a little bit?
Sure, no worries. So we just launched a game called Stormgate on PC, which is a real-time strategy game, kind of in the same style as Blizzard real-time strategy games. And indeed, we're using backend as a service. In our case, a combination of services from Pragma and Athora, largely running on Amazon. But anyhow, yeah.
Perfect. Thanks. Congratulations. A round of applause. It's an amazing launch. So these are the kind of some of the areas that we thought we'd go through and focus on today. We are going to make sure there's plenty of time for Q&A as we get towards the end. But some of the key areas that we often kind of think about when we're looking at this debate and help CodeWizards Group spend a lot of time kind of helping people look at which back-end tech to choose from. There's the high back-end costs, the resource constraints, and then functionality really becomes a key part of this. And maybe, Tim, if we come to you first, like you've just launched that game, you chose to go with an external, you bought your back-end. Why? How? What made you go down that route?
I think development resources are always scarce, no matter how big or small a studio is. The thing as the studio leader that I want to focus the team on is where we can add unique value, and that is building the game itself. So looking for an outside solution that checks the boxes that we need for backend was an early priority for us.
So Alex, obviously you're out there talking to studios, you've built a backend because you saw that problem. Like, what is it that you see reasons that people come to LootLocker?
I think that the main driver for people that use our service is the simplicity and the sort of accessibility of it. We really prioritize making it as low an impact on the engineers as possible, so that they can do the integration and then they can hand off the product to, the designers, the artists, the producers, the live ops team, whoever wants to get involved, and that also involves more of the team, which makes it for us obviously a stickier product.
JP, like you're just bringing your new product to the market. You're starting to talk to people. Like, what's the problem you're trying to solve for game developers?
That's a great question. I think we have a slightly different philosophy, actually, in a sense that as a AAA developer, we like power tools, right? So I approached it as an opportunity to provide the development teams, as much functionality out of the box as possible, but give them the power and the tools and the access to be able to actually grow and build that for their own, and really, take control of their own backend as if they were to build it in-house, but without all the huge upfront cost.
So from my time at Unity, one of the things I really found was if you're making a game and you've got a very specific style of game, and you're trying to then shoehorn your game design into somebody else's technology, you're kind of restrained on that. And not to knock Unity at all, I'm sure there's lots of Unity developers in here. But like, what Unity have done isn't build one brilliant game engine. They've built a game engine that can be used by a million different games. And that's the challenge that I think Unity fall. So Tim, when you were getting ready and you picked your back end, did you have to make any compromises to fit with what you wanted in kind of when you're buying technology which had limitations around it? Did you have to make any compromises to do that from what you wanted in your game design?
Yeah, great question. Definitely flexibility was one of the criteria with the backends that we evaluated at that time. And to be fair, 2020 is when we started that analysis, so it's been a few years. But I think in terms of things that we had to work around to accommodate the backend, one example would be that this backend was fairly platform specific in terms of Steam specific, which was okay for us. They're the biggest PC distribution platform, but there were some conscious limitations in terms of future growth to other platforms as a result.
Yeah. If you want to kind of build on that, how do you approach? You're building something. You want to get as many people using your back-end tech as possible. Like, how do you try and build something that covers everything to building something that developers will give them enough features?
I think compromise is part of creation of anything artistic. The canvas is only so big, and Picasso had to use that space. So I think that there is actually a good part when we say, if somebody wants to use our technology and they want to do something completely wild, we might say, we can do a lot of this stuff, but you're gonna have to compromise on this corner, and sometimes that actually can create something potentially better. So I think that's an important part of the discussion. But it comes down to what is the scope of the game, what are they trying to achieve, and what the relationship is. I mean, I think a challenge we would have selling to you is you're in Southern California, we're in Sweden. You probably want someone that's on your own time zone that you can call up, that you can have a good, close relationship with, because when shit hits a fan, you want to know that there's somebody nearby.
Fair point. Yeah.
Yeah. I think for me, when I had started it at first, we kind of had one thing in mind, which is basically, okay, if I wanted to build World of Warcraft today, or League of Legends, or Fortnite, what would I actually need? And so we kind of threw up all those things on the board and okay, well, that's our target list, right? Let's build out all these things, all these systems. And so we went really deep into features, because the idea was in mind, kind of like I was saying before, where part of what drove me to this was the idea that we needed a more encompassing solution, right? So I was targeting 80% of basically turnkey, out of the box, capability, so that you can really say like the last 20% is the thing that makes your game unique. So you don't have to focus on the back end of the technology, you focus on just your game. So we threw that all up on the board and we just tackled it. And I think that's where hopefully we provide enough value to the most people, and we want to constantly grow that. But it's not going to be necessarily for everybody, and our strengths are focused in certain areas.
Right. And in that kind of that principle of you've got a team, you've got a limited amount of resources and budget and time and all these other restrictions. Like, how do you approach? Like, you've all been in leadership roles, obviously, currently of a studio. Like, how do you decide what are the things you're going to do yourself, and then what is it you're going to get buy or outsource or anything else? How, JP, maybe you want to kick that off, or?
Yeah, I can. For us, it's really just what does the customer want? At the end of the day, most of our roadmap is driven by just customer request and customer demand. We use Discord all the time, and we basically use that as a way to kind of source and collect and filter out like ideas of like what's the next thing that we should like focus on, and that's where we try to drive our resources, because you can't solve everything, and resources are finite. So I think the best thing is to do is listen to your customer and focus on that, and then hopefully deliver a great product.
And you do the same thing for a game studio. You'd listen to community.
Yeah, even at games, yes, the audience is slightly different, right? I'm listening more to developers now, whereas before, I was listening more to players, right? As I'm building a game, like what's fun, what's exciting, what are you looking for? Are you looking for, greater social interactivity? Are you looking for gamification type of stuff? And we actually do, still, I think, keep an eye out to the player audience as well. Like what our players looking for, and then we can hopefully inform and help the developers get there. But yeah, it's a slightly different audience.
From a game developer's perspective, and I've run a few game studios previously, I think the question you ask yourself is, what is my business that I've built? I mean, you registered a company. What is your business? Are you making games? Then you should make games and not make the tools. There is most likely someone that has hit that same wall that you found yourself at and has built a tool, or in your network, someone that has found a way around that and maybe ended up with one of our technologies. But focusing on that is the most important thing. I think even the biggest AAA developers and publishers are starting to realize, especially when budgets are getting cut, that at the end of the day, you're building a game and it's entertainment, and you should focus on that craft and sort of you use third parties to support as much of everything else as you can.
Yeah, I think those are both great answers. I spent a little bit of time working on the God of War team, and I got into this team in a leadership position, and it's always disorienting to come into a new team in a leadership position. And one of the things I discovered was that Sony Santa Monica at that point in time was investing in building their own project scheduling tools. As somebody who hadn't been along on that journey with them, discovering that we're building and supporting a project management tool when obviously there are a ton of off-the-shelf choices, and the scope of work that we got to do on the next God of War is huge. It was a very clear, we don't need to be doing this. And there were some cultural things to overcome, but eventually they let go of that. They switched over to using off-the-shelf project management tools, and indeed a lot more resources were able to be dedicated to the project. So I think that's a great example of, you want to focus your resources on where you're adding unique value, for sure.
I've always looked at sort of the roots of the games industry, and I think this plays into your point. A lot of game developers and, especially some of the people who have been around for much longer have come from, modding. The modding scenes, especially in Sweden, we had a very big modding scene that built up our games industry, where you had to do everything yourself, because back then there were no companies building third-party solutions. So we've got this sort of entrenched belief that, we have to build these things ourselves because that's the only way to get exactly what we want. If you look at any other industry, software as a service, or SaaS as they call it, is hugely prolific, because everyone's realized we have a core business, everything else we have to buy because we do not waste energy on that. And I think if your point is crazy and a perfect point to make.
I'm not at all surprised by that, knowing the people at Sony Santa Monica and Sony in general. I think we constantly face, and I'm sure you feel it too, the not invented here problem, right? Especially, AAA developers and classic, old school game developers are very picky, right? Which is partly why we try to give a slightly different philosophy to our solution. But yeah, driving home that idea of no, don't waste your resources. You actually, save your money, save your time, just use something off the shelf, I think is going to get you a whole lot longer. And I think it's a risk problem too. I mean, it's a lower risk by using someone else's solution versus your own.
And there's also the word you used, which is support. Anything that you build internally, you have to support. In an ideal world, none of these platforms require you to update their SDKs, and then none of them change any of their rules, and your game just can live on forever. But we don't live in that world, and Apple likes to change their rules of what you can and can't do, and you have to update the SDK, or you get pulled off the App Store. The Steamworks SDK has to be updated from time to time, and that's already enough work with your game. If you have a backend, you have to hire people that have to always have their job as maintaining this thing as all these integrations change over the course of years and decades as your game stays live. And that's a cost you can never get rid of.
Well said.
I'm going to give you a slightly different twist on this then. So, because you're all very pro, obviously, you picked an external provider. How do you reconcile the risks of taking on a external provider and buying something where you're then at the mercy of that company's fate linked to yours? I think lots of people would be aware of GameSpark's, an amazing back end. It did very well. It had its day, got acquired by Amazon. Bida bada bong. It suddenly disappeared and removed the market. Lots and lots of game developers heavily impacted by that. Like, how do you start with you, Tim? Like, how do you think about those risks that you are kind of having to accept when buying something?
Yeah, there needs to be a trust relationship there for sure. And you talked about being in the same time zone, working with developers who you can directly build a relationship with, I think counts for a lot. There's always going to be some amount of risk, but the other piece of that is doing some diligence, finding out what other products are running on this piece of tech and the track record that's come out of that.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I think that makes a lot of sense. I completely forgot what I was going to add to that. So go ahead. I'll come back.
All right. I think the approach matters. So this is where I chose an open philosophy, right? This is why we have a source available model. We give everyone access to the source code. We have a very open, direct, even though our SaaS is designed to be very direct and engaging, where every customer gets access to their own database. All the resources are in a sandbox, and so you get to fully control and own it. And I think that goes a long way to creating that trust relationship, so that basically, if they want to take over, they can take over. If they want to do it themselves, they can do it themselves. But hopefully we can provide value and trust where it's like, look, let us do the heavy lifting. It's not your job, it's our job. We're the specialists. Let us do that for you. But if you really insist, here you go.
Yeah, I think that there's also what you can look for is in an agreement is control a change of control clause, where what happens if that company gets bought, what happens if the company gets shut down. People obviously ask us as a startup, what happens if you run out of money? We always talk about we have an enterprise solution. We can provide you with the source code, so then you can host it yourself, which may or may not be a good solution. But there's always risk. I mean, back in the example I like to make, back in the last decade, social gaming on Facebook was huge. Everyone jumped on Facebook, lots of games, people made a lot of money, and then Facebook made a change to something, and suddenly that completely killed that entire business. And so there's no guaranteed safety. Even if you work with the biggest companies, they can change their mind on how something works. So have a good relationship, I think, is the best one.
Yeah. In a couple of moments, I'm going to come out and ask for any questions. I'm going to ask one more from the team, but then if you think about any questions, we'll come to you. Lots of innovations that happen in the back-end game tech kind of create unique opportunities for games or unique features. So, when the first battle passes came out with some kind of subscription service, different bundling models, different kind of monetization strategies, often driven by innovations in the back-end tech. Is there a risk that, if all the game developers go out there and they're buying them, they're not building their own, it's going to become very standard? It'll be the same features across every game. Like, how can a game studio stand out and innovating in the back end if they're buying it?
do all Unity games look the same? I think that's the answer. I'd say. Like,
it's interesting to say that, because I would say, there's a long running joke, right? It's like Unreal Engine is a fantastic engine as long as you're making third person shooter, right?
Yeah.
Things evolve. Obviously, yes, there's a bit of a homogenization, tendency, I think, in some cases, right? If you're using all the same tech, then you'll use the same features, which means you'll have a lot of the same capabilities. But I think that's also, working together with the studios hand in hand, kind of saying like the support, the relationship is really important, because then you can actually allow those teams, to build something that's more unique and provide something that's of different value, and do it at, hopefully a lower cost than they could do it themselves. And that way it helps everybody out.
Yeah, I'll maybe just dovetail and say I think there's often a lot of flow back from developers to the technology creators that they're working with. We've certainly done a number of different customizations that I think got incorporated back in and that were useful to other developers. That's true with game engines. I think it's also true with backend engines. So the innovation doesn't stop. It just kind of has a different flow than when internally developed.
Nice. Does anybody have any questions for the panel? Yeah. It's quite a small distance. Oh, for the stream. For the stream!
I think this might be mainly for Tim. I was just wondering, when picking a platform like Xsolla or AWS, what is important, what factors are important for that decision?
Yeah, so for us, and just to provide context to the room, Xsolla is a backend service we work with that handles orchestration of our game servers. So as players are getting matched, Xsolla kind of takes care of spinning up server instances and then the route optimization. In our case, some specific criteria we looked at there were responsiveness, like incredibly low latency spin up of those servers, so that we don't have to keep buffers to handle fluctuations in load, and that helps us reduce cost, but also then service quality, just what we were able to deliver to our customers, to our players, as a result of the high quality of the route optimization that they were providing. But each piece of the back end kind of has different criteria like that we're optimizing for, and in our case, that's what led us to work with them.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
You guys would add on to that quickly?
Thor's great.
Perfect. I think we're going to run out of time. So a quick sound bite or something just to wrap this up. Anything you'd add in that debate, buy versus build? Anything you'd...
Yeah, my hope is that everyone can realize the value of basically of the space of products like ours that we're trying to offer to folks, where they can save costs, resources, lower their risk, and so forth. And that would be the ultimate takeaway that I would like people to have.
Yeah, I would say if you're interested in, if you're building a game and you feel like you need a backend, you should reach out to the various players in the space and have a conversation with them, see how it gels, see what they can offer you, explain what you're trying to do, because we all have different ways of describing what we do, and it's awful, unfortunately. But you might look at our feature page and say, like, oh, they don't do what I want to do. But if you talk to us, we can explain how you do that. There are so many use cases; it's impossible to cover them all in a nice marketing page. So talk to us.
Nice.
Yeah, and last thing I would add is big proponent of focusing as developers on the areas where you specifically can add your own unique flavor to a product, and relying on off-the-shelf technology to handle everything else to enable you to focus. So, yeah.
Fantastic. Please, round of applause for our fantastic panel today.